Here's a question for you. How do you define customer experience? For the most part, the term is used pretty interchangeably with customer support, and that narrowness is at the root of many modern CX problems. Joining me today is Colin Chow, the global managing partner at 21st Century Brand. Colin is a diagonal thinker with brand strategy experience. So I was interested in exploring this question with him, particularly as it relates to the crossover between brand and customer experience. Let's dive right in. Thanks so much for joining us today, Colin. I'm excited to have you.
Thanks, Perry. I'm really excited to be here.
Where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, so enjoying a nice 70-degree day here in the Bay Area.
Oh, that sounds so nice. Could do with some Ghirardelli chocolates right about now.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I'd love to kick it off and have you tell us a little bit more about 21st Century Brand and your role there.
Yeah. 21st Century Brand is a brand consultancy. We have headquarters in San Francisco and London. Our purpose really is to challenge brands to meaningfully impact the most urgent issues of our time. And we do that by accelerating purposeful growth of the world's most influential brands. So sometimes we like to talk about ourselves as the purposeful growth company because we very much believe that you can build brands that seamlessly blend doing good with doing good business. And a lot of our founding DNA comes from the experience of building Airbnb into the brand that it is today. A very purpose-led brand, creating a world where anyone can blog anywhere. But a lot of the lessons in building that helped us realize there's actually a playbook for building a really influential 21st century brand. And that's what we want to do, is work with as many of the brands out there as possible to make them into truly influential 21st century brands. And so we work with what we call rising stars, but also purposeful planets. Rising stars are high growth startups, often in the tech space. And they include Pinterest and Instacart, Peloton, Nextdoor, many more. But equally, we work with purposeful planets, those companies that have been around sometimes for centuries. The Mars, the LinkedIns, the Warner Medias and HBOs of the world. And they want to learn how to act like a 21st century brand so they can disrupt themselves before they just get disrupted. So that's 21st Century Brand, or 21CB. And my role at 21CB is I'm global managing partner. So I run our North American business.
Awesome. I think it's a great introduction. I'm writing a lot about purpose and what it means to be a 21st century brand and disrupting yourself before someone else does. I think that's a whole podcast episode in and of itself.
That would be a fun one to do.
Next time. But I do want to continue the conversation going a bit deeper on brand. And I think you're probably one of the best people to define what that is for our audience. So how would you define a brand?
Such a great question. If you ask 100 people, even in our industry, you get 100 different answers. And sometimes the answer depends on who the audience is. I think for marketers and people who are really in the brand space, sometimes I talk about it as it's just the emotional response that someone has when they encounter your product, your service, your company, whatever it is. A lot of times we work with companies where people come from a financial background or an engineering background. And then it sometimes makes more sense to say that brand is just the interface between your business and the communities you serve. But let's put it in human terms. If we think about a company as a person, I think it's fair to say that the brand is the soul of that organization. And if you think about it as the product or service is their body, marketing is their clothes, the way they show up, their accessories, support is how they behave socially. The brand is who they are fundamentally. The brand is the soul. And if you think about it that way, it becomes easy to see how brand impacts everything else. If you're feeling active and healthy, your body changes, the way you show up changes, you have different motivations, you might wear certain clothes. And based on your personality, you might interact in certain ways. And so we often talk about that with our clients, that really our job is just to extract and define the soul of the company. We're not inventing it. It's already there. How do we just pull that out and distill it into something that's really powerful? So if you kind of extrapolate that a bit and make it a little bit more tangible, what we do at 21CB is we work with brands and companies to define that foundational brand strategy. And our belief is brand is foundational. It's the foundation on which the entire company builds. And there's a misperception, I think, that brand is just a marketing or communications object. And that drives me nuts because brand is actually something that touches everything that the company does. It drives everything for the company, and it from the business strategy to the product experience, whether that's literally a product you can touch or a service or a marketplace, whatever it is, basically anything a business provides to customers. So once you have that starting point, the brand as foundation, you can build anything from there. And then everyone in the company has to be aligned and consistent in building that brand foundation.
I love what you've said, that the brand exists. Like, it's already there. It's just about defining it and harnessing it and making sure that it's being applied across the entire business. And I'm really interested, even the examples you gave at the beginning, that, it's an emotional response. It's the interface where you're interacting. It's the soul. It is all encompassing. And I think in my world, where we tend to see brands show up is in the customer experience. That's really the area where I'm most interested in understanding, how does a brand come to life? And generally, when I talk to leaders about customer experience, they equate it to customer support, which obviously isn't the whole story, because you've basically defined that the brand sort of transcends the entire customer journey. It's not only something I experience when I am a customer, it's also the feeling that I get when I walk into your store or when I visit your online marketplace. And so we like to think about customer experience as the sum of all of those interactions, right? It is the interface where I connect with your human agents. It is the emotional response that I have out of that interaction, and what I feel about your business. So if I go back to your analogy of, the brand is the soul, would you say that customer experience, as it relates to brand, ends up being more about a reputation than anything?
It's interesting. I feel like we could just spend an entire hour busting misperceptions out there. I love the misperception that, as you put it, customer experience is just about support. Because I think that's not true. I think customer experience is much more holistic than that. And to your point, yeah, it is. I think it is fair to say that brand and reputation, there's a lot of overlap between those things. Sometimes we say brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And if you think about it that way, your brand or your reputation, it's not just based on the moments when things go right. People don't just think about your reputation based on what you can control. A lot of times your reputation or your brand is based on when things go wrong, when they don't go as expected, when you don't think people are watching you. That's how we really shape both our personal reputations. And then by extrapolation, that's how brands shape that too. So I think that's why, in my opinion, customer experience is so fundamental to the brand. And again, brand is not just a marketing campaign. It's not just advertising. It's the way that you show up in every single interaction with the customer. And that's why at 21CB, when we define brand strategy, we're very agnostic about where it comes to life. Yes, often the work that we do eventually leads to brand campaigns or employee value propositions or visual ID and design refresh. All of those things can come out of brand, but just as important, we've found that customer experience is one of the most important places for companies to take action on that brand strategy. And I think it really ties back to, our belief. Our name is 21st Century Brand. So as you can imagine, we have a very strong point of view of what you need to do, what you need to excel at to be a 21st century brand. And we say there's 4 pillars. Number one, you have to be purpose-led. So you ensure that your scale benefits the communities you serve. The second is you're community-driven. So you galvanize all aspects of your community through meaningful incentive and mutual value creation. And when we say community, it's not just a customer audience. It also includes employees and partners and influencers and everybody in that cohort. Then the third pillar is being tech-enabled. You have to have world-class data-driven innovation that can scale globally, but also connect emotionally. And the fourth is being narrative-based. You have one shared story that unifies all of your stakeholders. Now, if you think about what customer experience is, it's really the intersection of that second and third pillar. It's being community-driven and it's being tech-enabled. And it does much more than that. But when we talk to our clients about being excellent at these 4 pillars, I think customer experience really hits at being excellent in pillars 2 and 3. And then that helps you to be narrative-driven, helps you to tell your story. So all of that to say, I think you're exactly right that customer experience is foundational to the brand experience, and it helps you build your reputation, your brand, however you want to talk about that, in a way that goes much more beyond just ads.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about the combination of being community driven and tech enabled. And I think maybe once upon a time, brands didn't have to be tech enabled in order to be community driven and really deliver a customer experience to be proud of. But if you're dealing with 21st century companies or these planets that have been around for a long time that want to disrupt themselves, I think there's this realization that they have to be tech enabled in order to deliver on what people are expecting from a business in this century.
Yeah, I think that's right, and you have to meet the customer where they are. In the old days, you'd pick up a phone and call customer service, and I think today people want a much wider range of ways to interact with brands, and they don't always want to talk to somebody. I know I don't. Sometimes I just want to have a chat with somebody, and that resolves my issue. And I almost hate that when I have to pick up a phone and talk to a human being. But if I do, then I want someone to be there to help me.
Yeah,
and
you want it to be great.
Tech enabled. Exactly. Tech enabled doesn't mean just technology. It means that it's tech enabling the humanity of the companies to come forward.
Oh, I love that, the humanity of the company. Let's talk about that for 1 second. Can we talk about how the people in a company are brand ambassadors? How do they become stewards of the brand when they're interacting with customers?
I love that question. I think, again, there's often a misperception inside companies that the people who represent the brand, they sit in marketing. And that's not true. The people who represent brand sit across every function in the company. And that's why when we work with clients, we always insist on having a cross-functional leadership team. It can't just be the CMO at the table or the CEO. There has to be the chief product officer and the chief people officer, the chief customer officer. All of them have to come together and align, number one, at a leadership level, that brand is everybody's role. And then once you get that alignment, you can really drive that deep into the organization and get everyone to understand that every interaction that a customer has really is an opportunity to build a greater brand impression. And that's what really successful companies do. Just as one example, we've been working with a company called Facet, and they have an incredible leadership team. Anders Jones is the co-founder CEO, and Shriti Joshi is the COO. And they have an incredible team there that is working to change the game in financial planning. And we work them to define a brand strategy that's rooted in this idea that financial planning, number one, should be more accessible to more people. And number two, that financial planning can actually drive personal growth for you as an individual, not just the growth of your assets. It's a really foundational way of different way of changing the role that financial planning has in people's lives. And after we define the brand strategy, one of the first things they're doing is actually cascading that across every team and organization, from sales to customer experience and social. Like everybody is really foundationally playing a role in becoming that brand ambassador. And I love that. I love that ambition. I love that kind of care and thoughtfulness in which they're rolling it out. Because for everyone, even support agents, every interaction is an opportunity for them to represent the brand. Not only is it good for the brand, but if you think about from the employee experience, how motivating is that? That you're not just putting out fires or dealing with upset customers, but you're really solving issues for customers in a way that's going to create a better perception of the brand overall. And so really understanding that, really understanding how you, no matter what level you're in the organization, how you are helping to fulfill the purpose of a company, that to me is really exciting because that's how brands come to life. It starts from the inside before it can reach the outside.
I love that you've brought it back to the opening question we had around purpose and being purpose-driven. I think it's definitely motivating for anyone to know that when you're interacting with someone, it's usually when I have to speak to a human at a company, it's because I've already tried to solve my problem and I'm probably frustrated that I got to this point. But if I get to that person and they are aligned to the purpose and the brand mission and they're exuding the soul of the company, I don't know. I just think it does humanize the company. It does humanize that interaction. And it's actually, I think it's better for parties on both sides of the conversation.
Yeah, I think you can tell, right, when someone is just there and they're checking the boxes and doing the job. And then you can tell when someone is really motivated, believes in the purpose of a company, and then it becomes so much more easy and transparent and natural for that person to represent the brand if they understand what their role is and they really buy into the purpose of the organization overall.
Totally agree. All right, I think I want to move on now to the audience question that was submitted, which is, what happens when the brand and the customer experience are not aligned? What are the downstream effects of that?
Super interesting. So if they're not aligned, I mean, let's go back to the analogy we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. if a brand is a person and it's your soul, and the customer experiencing, let's say that's how other people experience you. And if those two things aren't aligned, then the person is saying and thinking things about themselves that aren't true in practice. And if you think about this in real life, if you've ever met somebody who is saying and doing one thing, but you know it's not authentic, it's not true to who they are, there's, even if it's subconscious, there's a gap there and you don't trust them. You don't want to spend time with them. In fact, you want to run the other way, because we all have really good instincts as people or as consumers or as customers, that when what you do and say doesn't line up with the real intention of that company or that person, you just have this sense of inauthenticity, that's going to prevent you from wanting to spend more time with them or create deeper engagement with them. So that's really what it is. When it's not aligned, you push customers away, right? And brand strategy, for it to really be effective, it has to be brought to life consistently. You can't do it 4 out of every 10 times, 8 out of 10 times. You have to be doing it every single time, because it's much easier to lose a customer with one bad interaction than to gain them, right? So the consistency becomes such a powerful part of that. And when those two things aren't aligned, you can see brands really struggle with that. And that's why it's so important, again, to define a truly a real purpose. We don't invent things. It has to be at the soul of the company, of the leadership, because it'd be like me saying to you, Perry, I'm going to give you a different personality. Now I'm going to make you act a different way. It doesn't work, right? I have to understand what's inside of you, and maybe you might want to change little aspects of it or the way you show up, but you can't fundamentally change the soul of what a company is or what a person is.
I think you've made such a good point about trust and how it's broken when you feel like what someone is saying and doing are not in alignment with each other. Like, I can relate to that on a personal level when you're just like, ooh, that doesn't make sense, or this person is confusing to me, and it doesn't make you feel very comfortable. And I imagine that if you're a business like Airbnb or even Faucet, who's like helping people with their money, trust is so important to earning business and retaining business. And so if we take it back to earlier in the conversation where we talked about, the sum of my experience with the brand, or my perception of the brand, is the sum of all of the interactions I have with them. You make an excellent point that, you can't deliver 4 out of 10 times. You have to deliver every time. There has to be this consistency. And so I'm picking up what you're putting down about the consistency of the brand energizing every area of the business, and everyone at the company being a representative of that brand.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's also important to think about the customer experience very holistically. We work with a lot of companies that are multi-sided marketplaces. They have a lot of different communities. Instacart is a great example of this. Instacart brings you groceries, so you are a customer, but they also have shoppers who go out and get it. They have retailers, they have advertising partners. For Instacart, and credit to the leadership there, one of the things that they recognized after we defined a brand strategy was, number one, how do we help drive this into the employee experience? The employees are another form of customer, so we help them with their employee value proposition and values. But importantly, they also recognized they weren't doing enough for their shoppers. And this was really critical. And I think, again, to the point of being aligned with purpose, they realized that they weren't taking care of their shoppers. And if you don't take care of the shoppers can't take care of the customers, the end customers, right? And so we help them define some shopper commitments and real actions, live phone support, in-store navigation. These are all things that they were working on, and just tying it together in a way that really showed, hey, we actually have the best intentions for shoppers. And sometimes what a shopper needs and what a consumer needs are going to be a little bit at odds, but we're here for them. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it all creates a better customer experience. So I think that's part of it too. It's not just about being consistent, but being holistic and thinking about all the ways that you can help your customer, even if it's not as direct as it might seem on the surface.
Oh, it's such a good example. Okay, I want to dive in now to one of our final segments about the best and worst brand interactions that you've had. So let's start with maybe without naming any names, one of the worst brand interactions that you've had with a brand recently.
Oh, there's so many. And I'm tempted to put some brands on blast. But I won't. I'll refrain. I'll say, perhaps no surprise, but I'm shocked really at how bad the interactions continue to be in the health insurance and healthcare sector. And it goes back to authenticity, Perry, because I see and I won't name my health insurance provider, but I see a veneer of technology and brand language. They've made it much more cheerful. They've kind of taken some of the superficial lessons of how a brand should show up. So I can kind of see that, but the experience is still frustrating and it's totally broken. Whether it's a useless search for providers that are actually a network, or recently I submitted a claim for glasses for my son, and they got rejected because they said it's diabetes care. So very minor things, but when in the aggregate, it just goes back to the point that no matter how much gloss you put on a brand, at the end of the day, customer experience, there can't be a gap. It feels inauthentic.
Especially when you're talking about health and money. I think it puts a premium on trust and the quality of the experience.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about one of your best brand interactions and what made it so special. So maybe here you want to share the brand name. It's totally up to you.
Yeah, well, just to stay in the same area of healthcare, I do think one brand that's done an incredible job is One Medical. And One Medical has been in the news. They just got acquired by Amazon. So I'm be very curious to see how those two companies pull together, because Amazon also does some really interesting things on their side. But One Medical provides, trying to think of the right way to describe it, for a fee, you get access, faster access to medical care. But it's also the way that they've set up the interactions. Everything is very warm, very human onboarding experience, even though it's all done through technology. After you visit a provider, they send a post-visit follow-up. It just feels connected. It feels real. It feels all kind of seamlessly connected to the brand that they've been building. And it feels like someone has thought carefully about the customer journey. What is it like? What is it like to feel nervous and scared or have questions, and has really created a customer experience that helps to make what can be a very terrifying, nerve-wracking, stressful industry into one that actually you have warm feelings about, which seems incredible.
Yeah, the first thought that came to mind was, oh, this is a really thoughtful approach. And so I'm glad you said, it sounds like someone really thought about my experience as a customer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So with that, I'd like to highlight some of the key takeaways that I have from today's discussion so that listeners can turn this conversation into action. The first is that you have a brand, whether or not you've intentionally defined it. It's in your best interest to purposely define your brand. Number two, your brand should transcend silos and be a guiding light for teams across your organization, not just for customer support. And finally, every time your brand interacts with a customer is an opportunity to build trust and establish a relationship. Ensure that you're looking at the customer journey holistically and offering a consistent experience that best reflects your brand. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Colin. We really appreciate it. How can people get in touch with you?
Thanks so much for having me, Perry. This was a blast. People can find me on LinkedIn, connect me on LinkedIn. If you want to find out more about 21st Century Brand, you can email hello@21cb.com. That's the best way to get in touch.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Now Brands Talk. If you have any burning brand interaction questions or would like to give us feedback, you can email us at podcast@ada.support. We'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to hear more conversations about closing the brand interaction gap, subscribe to Now Brands Talk wherever you like to listen to podcasts.